This week we're going to look at Congress. What is the role of Congress in American constitutional democracy? Lesson 21. Essential question: what is the role of Congress in American constitutional democracy? Students will be able to explain basic differences between Congress and the British Parliament and how Congress reflects America's commitment to representative government and federalism, identify several constitutional sources of congressional power, identify some of the challenges that members of Congress face in representing and serving their constituents, and to evaluate, take, and defend positions on contemporary issues about congressional representation and organization. Here's our Florida standards. We're going to analyze the structures, functions, and processes of the legislative branch as described in Article 1 of the Constitution. Here's our key vocabulary: delegate theory of representation, enforcement powers, federalism, gerrymandering, implied powers, inherent powers, trustee theory of representation. Okay, so our first question is, how does Congress differ from the British Parliament? So the founders are all, some way, shape, or form, have some type of ties, whether it be through ethnicity or legal standing, or that's where they went to college. All of them have some type of relationship, some way, shape, or form to the British system of government. Okay, so the founders are going to adopt several parts of the British system for our system of government, but there's going to be some major differences. There's going to be some major changes like separation of powers and representation. So if we take a look at the separation of powers in our constitutional government, the executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch all share power. They are all separate. Well, in Britain, the Prime Minister is the head of the executive branch there, but the Prime Minister is a creature or has been created by the legislative branch. So in our system of government, if we want to impeach the president, it's a lot harder process. There's only been two presidents that have been impeached, and both of them were not removed from office. In Britain, Parliament can call for a no confidence vote, and then just by democratic majorities vote the prime minister out of office. They only have to be reviewed by the House of Lords. That's their kind of like their Senate, their upper house. But the lower house is the House of Commons. They're the ones that make the laws. The prime minister comes from that. And if they have a no confidence vote in the prime minister, they can just vote the prime minister out and elect a new prime minister that's going to agree with them. So there it is right there. The executive branch is a creature of the legislative branch in Great Britain. Length of terms, the House of Commons does not have a fixed schedule. Congress here in the United States does. They will legislate for 2 years, and then we'll have a new election for the House of Representatives, and then 1/3 of the Senate is up for election. And federalism, shared power between the central and state governments. We have to have some type of system of federalism here in this country just because of how vast our country is. It is huge. We're the 4th largest country in the world. So we can't have centralization of power. We have to have decentralization of power. And when we looked at Federalist 45, Madison did call for a decentralization of power. Because if you have too much centralized power, it's going to be a road to tyranny. Well, in Great Britain, they do have a centralized power, though, but their country is a lot smaller. And those people are very, very used to how their government works and operates. Government is more a part of their daily lives over there than it is here in the United States. So even though we have very, very similar cultural items like religion and language, but there are some major differences when it comes to our histories. So that's the main difference between Parliament and Congress. Okay, so what are Congress's constitutional powers? Well, we got to take a look at John Locke. We're going to take, for our system of government, we're going to take a look at two political philosophers that existed before the United States was even a country, like John Locke and Montesquieu. John Locke is going to claim that the legislature is the most powerful branch of government because this is where the laws are made. The legislative branch, Congress, was designed to be the place for politics. The courts were supposed to be above politics. The presidency was supposed to be above politics. This is where the politics is supposed to be, in the legislative branch. But in the Constitution, Congress is going to have some broad powers, like the necessary and proper clause, which gives Congress the ability to make law that is necessary and proper for the times. It can be anything from like building a new highway system to putting in trade barriers with other countries, to during World War II declaring war. So the necessary and proper clause, or what we call the elastic clause, does give a lot of broad powers to Congress to make law. Now, Congress cannot legislate some things. So it cannot tax articles exported from any state and cannot grant titles of nobility. A lot of countries in the world, especially ones that are monarchies or have been monarchies, like to grant titles of nobility. We are not going to grant titles of nobility in this country. We're not going to reward people these titles, okay, because that's seen as kind of above everybody else. Here in this country, everyone is equal when it comes to the law. Also, with the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, those are our civil liberties. So that means that they are protections from government. So if you take a look at the First Amendment, it starts off, Congress shall make no law, ... Okay. So what that means is that Congress is not going to get involved in that. So Congress cannot make any type of law restricting speech, cannot make a law establishing religion, cannot make a law restricting you from practicing your own religion, cannot make a law restricting protests, things of that nature. They are all protections for the individual. Congress is also going to have enumerated powers. These are powers listed in the Constitution. They are actually listed out. So these are things like advise and consent for judges, ambassadors, and public ministers. So how that works is that the president will appoint judges, ambassadors to foreign countries, and public ministers like Secretary of State or Secretary of the Treasury, okay, cabinet level members. So they just cannot come to power, and they just cannot sit in the cabinet meetings with the president. They have to be confirmed by the Senate, okay? So it's kind of like a job interview, or in congressional terms, we call advise and consent. So that means that the Congress is going to advise the president, and then they're going to give their consent or their blessing for who the president kind of nominates. Congress can also create courts. In the 1890s, Congress actually expanded appellate courts. They created more appeals courts to kind of take the workload off of the Supreme Court. Congress has the power to do that. Congress even has the power to expand judgeships on the Supreme Court or in the inferior courts. There's been times where we have had as many as 11 judges on the Supreme Court, and there's been times where we've had as many as low as 6 or 7 judges on the Supreme Court. Congress has that power. Congress also has the power to admit new states and adopt rules and regulations for territories, and they can also propose constitutional amendments. Now, they cannot ratify constitutional amendments. That's up to the states, but they can propose constitutional amendments. So let's take a look at some more powers that Congress has. So let's take a look at implied powers. Implied powers means that it's not actually stated in the Constitution. It's just more of a suggestion. So they can create administrative agencies. They can create new departments. Back in 2002, in the wake of September 11th, Congress authorized the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, giving the president another secretary and another agency to help protect the homeland. Congress can create those. Congress can even take away agencies as well, or kind of switch around agencies. So one example would be let me think here. the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, is going to come out in the 1930s as a national police force. Well, before that, there was another national police agency that would be working for the Treasury Department when it came to enforcement of prohibition. So that's going to evolve into the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and they're going to be kind of become their own department separate from the Department of Treasury. That's just one particular example. Congress is going to have congressional oversight, which is monitoring and supervising agencies. So they can call in supervisors, the FBI director, CIA director, what have you, and actually actually have them testify on anything that's going on. They can also examine agency budgets and expenditures, and this is a very important power that Congress has as well. They do have the power of the purse. They can expand budgets for agencies, or they can take away money from agencies as well. And again, they can close agencies. That's a power that they have. Inherent powers. These are powers that are innate or ingrained in an institution. So this is basically powers that any government has in the entire world. So you can pick any country, and they're going to have inherent powers. So like governed territories. That is going to be an inherent power. If the United States wants to expand, like if we want to bring Puerto Rico into the Union, Congress would have to go along and sign off on that. So how does Congress represent the people and the states? So before 1842, most states elected their representatives at large. So the way to kind of look at this is you would have several candidates, depending on the census and depending on your state population. You would have several candidates that would go for election in the whole entire state. So you could have, let's say you had a very, very large state in population. Let's take New York. Let's say New York is allocated 15 representatives. So before 1842, if you were an eligible voter, you could vote on all 15 of those representatives at large, and you might have 20 or 30 people on the ballot, and whoever got first place all the way down to 15th place would be the representatives in Congress. That's how that would work. Nowadays, when you hear at large, some states only have one representative, like Wyoming, or the Dakotas only have one representative, so they will be called the at-large representative. So that means that they're going to represent the whole entire state at large. All qualified voters were eligible to vote for all candidates to fill that state's allotment of representatives. States have to redraw district lines after each 10-year census because with the House of Representatives, you're dealing with population. So some people leave states, some people move into states. When that happens over the course of 10 years, states are going to lose congressional districts, states are going to gain congressional districts. So we're going to talk about apportionment and redrawing district lines in class. And sometimes states that have a certain political party that is very, very, very powerful in their state, they control the state government, they can redraw the district lines that's going to benefit them in the House of Representatives. So we call this gerrymandering. So we're going to talk more about that in class to really get you all a good feel on what gerrymandering is. And groups that are dissatisfied can challenge the state in court when it comes to these new district lines for any reason. Usually their defense is as well as discriminatory or it's too partisan. Here's a map of Florida's congressional district. We're actually going to take a look at this in class, but when you're looking at gerrymandering, if you take a look at the top of the slide and take a look at the 5th congressional district, that is a gerrymandered district here in Florida. Now, the bigger the state, or excuse me, the bigger the congressional district, this means is that the people are more spread out. But if you take a look at on the lower part of the map, the more southern part of the map, you can see it, especially where where Fort Lauderdale is, and Miami. Now, all the congressional districts that you see are all going to be in the same population size, give or take. But the bigger the ones that you see, like if you take a look at the 2nd congressional district, this means that the people are more spread out. The smaller the ones, like if you take a look at the 27th or even the 24th congressional district, that means that people are more compact there. But these are what Florida's congressional districts look like. All right, so why is districting controversial? Well, in the previous slide, I mentioned gerrymandering. So what gerrymandering is, it's drawing district lines to achieve favorable political results for one party, and the goal is safe elections and not close elections. So we're going to have a court case called Westbury versus Sanders, and what they're going to what the Supreme Court is going to rule on is that when states redraw congressional district lines, they have to adopt one person, one vote rule. So in this particular court case, believe this was I want to say it was in Georgia. Georgia did not redraw their congressional district lines constitutionally. So they have, let's say, 4 or 5 representatives at the time. I'm not sure the number, but let's just go along with this example. So if you have your first congressional district, let's say your average is 500,000 people. And then your second district is 500,000 people. Third district is 500,000 people. Fourth and fifth districts are both 500,000 people each. That is, on average, that is pretty proportional. Well, in this particular case, let's say one of the districts only had 100,000 people and one of the other districts had 1 million people. Well, that's not proportional. That means that that district that has 100,000 people can have a lot more sway and a lot more political clout than the other district that has 1 million people. So this is a clear violation of the Equal Protection Clause under the 14th Amendment. So this court case is going to come out, and it's going to say, well, all the districts, congressional districts in the entire country, even though states get to draw these district lines, you have to have about the same equal population in each congressional district. Today, I believe it's about 740,000. Back in 1790, when congressional districts were first established, the average population in each congressional district was about 33,000. So we've gained a lot of people since then, but with Westbury versus Sanders, it has to be one person, one vote rule. And in 1913, Congress is going to fix the size of the House of Representatives at 435. So eventually, in our lifetime, we probably will see congressional districts that are going to house 1 million people on average. All right, so what theories of representation guide members of Congress? So there's 2 different theories here when Congress members vote. We have the trustee theory and the delegate theory. So the trustee theory is going to be the theory that the Federalists are going to be kind of supportive of, and that's the trust the representative to make the right decision for the district. So if you live in a congressional district, just trust your representative to make the right decision. And if they don't, that's why we have elections. If you're in the House of Representatives, you are elected to a term for every 2 years. If you are a senator, it is a 6-year term. So if you don't trust your representative to make the right decision, well, try to get them voted out of office. And then you have the delegate theory. This is kind of what the Anti-Federalists were going along with. And to be a good delegate, you're not going to vote based on what you want. You're going to vote based on what your constituents want. So you should be mirroring what your constituents' views are when it comes to that particular election. If you do it this way, then you're going to not have a difficult time whenever you're trying to get reelected every 2 years or so. So these are the 2 theories. Today in 2019, the most trusted or the most popular theory that's done is just the trustee theory, just because of the size and scope of the congressional districts nowadays. it's just very, very different than how it was back in 1790. The likelihood of you actually knowing your representative in 1790 was actually very, very high. The likelihood of you even seeing your representative today is very, very low. So these are the two theories, but today the trustee theory is the one that most congressmen use.